Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pauper metagame. So today I want to do a response to an article that's actually now about a week old on ChannelFireball and give you a brief channel update. So the brief channel update is that I was having some audio problems last week. I recorded a 1 hour video responding to this article and discussing the Pauper metagame, and my audio didn't work. Someone was kind enough to point out that I had actually uploaded a video with no sound for their, anonymity. I will not mention their name, but thank you. So anyway, I got a new headset. I think I've got everything lined out. I also got some new video recording software, so I'm trying some new things here. Hopefully this will work out okay. And yeah, so this is about a week late, but I still wanted to cover it. This is an important article, so let's dive right in. Alex Ullman's an individual who's been keeping up with the Pauper metagame for a very long time. Just a little bit of background about him. He's been around since the very beginning. I guess you could say even before the very beginning. As long as there's been Pauper in the Magic Online world, Alex Ullman has been around. He was part of the Pauper Deck Challenge website, which was associated with Gatherling, which existed back when the only Pauper events in Magic Online were player run events. Now I'm mentioning Magic Online, and you might be wondering, why should I even care about Magic Online? Well, if you're interested in Pauper, then Magic Online is very important for this reason. The legality that is largely being adopted in paper is one that was honed and crafted online. And the reason for that is there's been a ton of competitive tournaments played online to help and make sure that the ban list, which we're about to talk about here in a little bit, has been properly crafted. If I told you we had a brand new Wild Wild West format, that sounds fun, but it could also be potentially broken and after a little bit very unfun. Just like the idea of no ban list modern sounds sexy at first, but after you play it for a little while you realize it's a little bit of a train wreck. So the same thing holds true for Pauper, just allowing all commons that have been printed at common to be legal doesn't necessarily lead to the best format. When people are running things like Sinkhole, Hymn to Torok, and High Tide, things get even more degenerate than they already are in various Pauper lists. There are some oddities because we have some cards that were actually printed at common online that are not common in paper, so that's a little weird. But overall, there have been thousands and thousands of tournament results that have come in, and I mean, I guess probably, I don't even know, tens of thousands. I don't know. There have just been a massive amount of events that have been run over the last decade. A lot of daily events, tons of league games and results and 5-0 lists, and then there have been challenges off and on. There have been quite a few of those. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, hard to even guesstimate. Probably less than 100 of those, but anyway, the point is there's a lot of data to draw upon. When you have all that data, you can make a good decision about what a proper ban list should be. So that's why Magic Online is important, and Alex Ullman's been around for a long time. I wanted to say all that just to make it clear that Alex Ullman is someone who's been following Pauper for a long time, and he understands competitive Pauper. He gets it. Let's put it that way. And I'm going to be disagreeing with Mr. Ullman in some ways, but it's no disrespect to him, and I appreciate and thank him for drawing attention to Pauper and being an advocate of the format. So let's just be clear. I'm just because I disagree with him on some of his conclusions, in no way am I trying to impugn him or anything. I respect and appreciate everything he does for the format. So anyway, he put this article, which I'll link in the show notes. It's called Pauper's Growing Pains. Is it time to ban a blue card? This was published, like I said, about a week ago on April the 3rd. And he's talking about how Pauper's a growing format and there's all these things going on. And, he points out how blue is just a very dominant color in Pauper, which is true. I do not disagree with him on that. How the dominant spells and creatures and cards and everything in the whole format are blue, and this is true. He also talks about how Ash Barons came out, and this further reinforced how good blue was. I don't know how necessarily true this is. It's kind of true, but basically he points out how you can abuse fetch lands with Brainstorm. We already had access to Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. Yes, you can argue that Ash Barons is better than those because you can actually have the alternative of playing it untapped. So this is true, but this is kind of a, I don't know, you could have a long argument or discussion about that. But at any rate, he argues that Ash Barrens with Brainstorm further exacerbates the situation. Um, and he just kind of talks about how, Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, all the cantrippers help to smooth things out quite a bit. And then he talks about different ban options where we could ban Ponder and Preordain, we could ban Gush, we could ban Augur of Bolus, and yeah, he kind of just wraps it up by basically saying that there's too much blue and we should probably ban something. So I don't disagree with Alex that there's a lot of blue stuff floating around. This is definitely true. Let's just take a quick look here. So when we go to this is the going back to MTG Goldfish format staples for Pauper. So this is basically the same list pretty much that he had. We've got Preordain, Counterspell, Hydroblast, Pyroblast, Lightning Bolt, Ponder, Augur, Bolus, Spellstutter Sprite, Delver of Secrets, and Fairy Miscreant. So he's right. There's a lot of blue being played, and there's also, just in terms of overall cards, in terms of creatures, all the top creatures are blue: Augur, Bolus, Spellstutter Sprite, Delver of Secrets, Fairy Miscreant, Ninja, Muldrifter, Stormbound Guys. The top 7 creatures being played are all blue. And when you look at cards in general, the top spells being played are all blue, with the exception of Lightning Bolt and Pyroblast. I mean, that's true also for the most played cards. And then when we look at the top land played, Island is the big winner, then Swamp, then Snow-Covered Island. So this is interesting because there's some other things going on here that I'm just going to mention as an aside. And I'll point out that Alex Willman didn't come out and say that we need to ban something to specifically slow down Delver decks slash, is it Delver slash, Ninja of the Deep Hours decks. But one of the things that's pretty obvious when you really look at the information being presented here, when you see Snow-Covered Island showing up with greater frequency than Forest, Mountains, or Plains, that tells you, Snow-Covered Island is basically just played in Is It Delver. So this tells you that Is It Delver is an absurdly popular deck right now, along with Delver decks in general, which can just run islands. And of course, islands also slot into Tireless Tribe and a lot of other things. Blue is very strong. But you notice that the Preordain, Counterspell, Hydroblast, Pyroblast, Lightning Bolt, Ponder, Dispel, Gush, Brainstorm, with the exception of Prophetic Prism, the top spells in the format all go in Is It Delver. Top creatures: Augur, Spellstutter Sprite, Delver, Fairy Miscreant, Ninja. The top 5 creatures all go in Is It Delver. And when we look at the most played cards overall, every single one of them goes into Is It Delver. So yeah, blue is really strong right now, but you can get even more specific and say that Is It Delver is seeing a tremendous amount of popularity in play right now as well. This is Spellstutter Sprite is largely just played in Mono Blue Delver or Is It Delver. Same thing for Fairy Miscreant. The fact that these are showing up on the list, if we just saw a lot of can-tripping cards, then that would be one thing. But there's some clear indications looking at this list that we can drill down further and see that we've actually just got a boatload of Delver decks, which isn't going to surprise anybody who's actually been playing in the leagues or the weekend challenges. So moving along next, even though I agree with Alex Willman, it's a little bit awkward because he's not saying that we should do something to slow down the power level of these Delver decks, because in the most recent, well, I shouldn't say the most recent, I haven't had time to check the most recent Pauper Challenge, but last weekend's Pauper Challenge was actually taken down by a Tireless Tribe deck. So Is It Delver not taking it down all the time, but that deck also runs a lot of the same blue cards as well. So I think that's kind of where Alex is coming in and saying, look, we got a couple blue decks at the top of the format, we should ban something blue to try to slow these things down a little bit. But I don't think this is true for this reason. When you really think about a ban list, there's 2 philosophies of banning that are generally appropriate. You ban cards that are just so absurdly powerful that they break the format. Okay, that's option number 1. Number 2, you ban a lot of different cards that would restrict the format so that you can have the most wide open format that you can possibly have. So you ban cards that aren't necessarily too powerful or broken, but maybe by banning one card and effectively banning one deck, you open up the possibility of another 10 or 15 decks that can now be played because one deck was just squeezing so many other creative options out of the metagame. So basically, we're talking about a more aggressive ban policy where you ban cards that are going to cause too much restriction of certain deck types so you can create a very diverse metagame, and there's nothing wrong with that ban policy. On the other side of the spectrum is a very conservative ban policy where you only ban the most egregious cards, and this comes from a philosophy that we don't want to ban more cards than we really need to, because generally nobody thinks of banning as being a great thing, and having cards that you can't play is always kind of a feel bad thing for people. So when we look at the pauper ban list, there's 10 cards that have been banned thus far. Considering that this is an eternal format, that's a fairly small ban list. And when we look at the actual cards that have been banned, we've got Treasure Cruise, which is absurdly broken. We have Temporal Fissure, which involves Storm. We have Peregrine Drake, which involves untapping, so free mana. We've got Invigorate, which combined with Infect is a free card that makes it very easy to kill people on turn 2. Grape Shot, which is not necessarily the most broken of the cards we're going to cover, but it did kind of, I don't know, it had this definitely hyper constrictive element to it where you just had to be doing certain things. I mean, for example, if you're playing a mono green deck against Grape Shot, there really wasn't going to be much interaction going on there. Grape Shot was just one of those things that you could view in different ways as far as keeping the metagame in check, but I think a lot of people just viewed it as being very non-interactive. And at common, you could have things you could interact. You know, you could duress, you could counterspell, but counterspell is not great against Storm. So really, you were looking to prevent the damage with, various white sources like Prismatic Strands, or go with discard. And this really was kind of not a great feeling if you're playing something like green and then blue wasn't very effective. So you could have long arguments about whether or not Grape Shot actually should have been banned. I don't have a strong feeling either way about this. I'm okay with it being banned. I'm okay with it not being banned. There's actually nothing on the ban list that I think is really inappropriate. Frenetic Search is just busted. It's filtering free mana. Empty the Warrens, kind of like Grape Shot. I could go either way with this one. It is strong. I mean, you can do some degenerate things with Storm decks, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's as bad as the other things we have on the list. Cranial Plating, this is busted. Cloud Post, if you've ever thought that Tron is sort of in the borderline gray fringe of approaching needing to be banned, then Cloud Post absolutely positively must have to be banned. It's just broken and degenerate. It's so consistent. When you combine it with the other Locust Land, you get tons of mana, tons of free life gain. It's just crazy, and it's so even more consistent than Tron. It's just nuts. Cloud of Fairies, again, more free mana. So, I mean, basically we have a lot of free mana things that were banned, a lot of Storm things that were banned, free spells that were banned, and, a few other things here and there. And that's basically it. So there's a very conservative ban policy that Pauper's followed up to this point. I don't think that just because the game, the format, I should say, is starting to make its way to more of the masses, that we should suddenly pivot on a dime, change the way that we've done things heretofore, and start banning to create a more diverse, wide open metagame for the colors. So basically, Pauper for the last decade has followed a very conservative ban policy. I think that the format should just stick with the same philosophy when you're in a very turbulent time, and right now is kind of a turbulent time for Pauper because it's starting to emerge in a bigger way. Now is not the time to be making aggressive philosophical changes in how you operate your ban list. Now, once Pauper becomes sanctioned as a format and starts to get more mainstream and more accepted and tons of people are playing it and it's kind of been out there, more of a mainstream paper thing for a few years, fine, go back and revisit what you're doing with your ban list. But right now is not the time to change what you've been doing. The other thing is, so I talked about two different approaches to banning things. You can ban things because they're just busted, powerful, absurd cards, or you can ban to create diversity. But usually when we talk about banning to create diversity, we're talking about diversity in terms of total number of decks being played. You'll very rarely, if ever, hear someone talking about creating diversity of colors. For example, in Modern, let's say that all of a sudden there were tons of decks that were winning that had the color red in them. And someone said, look, Lightning Bolt is just showing up everywhere. It's the most commonly played card in everything. I mean, you can't even put a list together without slamming 4 lightning bolts anymore. It's why even have a 60 card format. It might as well be a 56 card format because everything's running lightning bolt. I'm not saying that's the case, but I mean, even if it was really absurdly crazy how many people were playing lightning bolt, it it might not necessarily get anywhere because uh, it's it's not necessarily just about balancing colors. It's not even about if one card sees a ton of play. It's more about that spectrum of, are we talking about something that's absurdly crazy powerful? And right now in Pauper, cantrips are not it. None of the cards that Alex Ullman that he's talking about are just so absurdly powerful that they need to be banned. Also, if you ban them, I don't think it's necessarily the case that you're going to create more metagame diversity. He just wants to ban some blue cards so maybe a few other colors could see some action. But I don't think that's a valid ban philosophy just to try to get the colors in balance. I think it's more important to make sure the decks stay in balance. The other issue is there's no real guarantee that banning a few blue cards is going to do anything for you. This might seem like, hey, if we ban some cantrips, maybe some other colors will get a chance. But right now, when you see that Is It Delver and Mono Blue Delver are at the top along with Inside Out Combo, and then you've got Blue Black Control and Tron lists. Well, uh, Tron doesn't run any cantrips. Blue Black Control doesn't actually have to run Preordain. You can just use cheap removal and use some bigger card draw spells. Not to mention Muldrifter is more of a mainstay in your Blue Black Control and your Tron lists. So getting rid of those cantrips isn't going to do anything. Also, the Is It Delver and Mono Blue Delver decks could pivot and run Serum Visions, Sleight of Hand, Brainstorm. I mean, you'd have to ban so many cantrips, and it doesn't really feel like it's worth it when you might not even change that much. I mean, if you shift things around where, okay, now the Delver decks become the 7th and 8th best decks in the format, and now we have 5-color Tron and Blue Black Control and Inside Out Combo at the top. I mean, you'd have to ban so many blue cards to really get this job done because there are a lot of really good blue cards. There's also another element here that is hiding under the surface that some people probably get. Everybody probably gets it. You probably know it somewhere. You just have never. A lot of people haven't really. I don't know how to explain it, so I'll just say it. Basically, mid-range and control decks have a big advantage in Pauper from the standpoint of mana, going with multicolor mana bases. Aggressive decks in Pauper have an advantage of consistency and having a streamlined focus that traditionally has helped them do pretty well. But right now, if Ash Barrens has done anything, it's added enough reinforcement to getting color diversity that's going to always favor everything that's not pure aggro. And the reason for this is all the color fixing that's ever going to exist at common is going to be in the form of a tapped land. It's going to involve your color fixing being tapped. If you go fetch up a land, it's going to come into play tapped or effectively cost you a mana. One of the interesting things about Ash Barrens is, A, you can just drop it as a land so you can have untapped mana, and B, you tap another land to go search up a land, so the land you're playing, the color you need, actually comes into play untapped. So Ash Barrens definitely has some powerful elements to it. But the other fetch lands, Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds, are very good too. So anyway, basically, aggro must hit its 1-drop. That's what it boils down to. Aggro has to hit its 1-drop to be in the game. If you're playing mid-range, control, tempo, you can afford to have your first land come into play tapped and then make sure your 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops fall into place. And in some ways, it's more important that your 2-drops, 3-drops, and 4-drops fall into place for you if you're playing a mid-range or control deck. So Is It Delver is not really an aggro deck. It's a tempo deck. Koldath Boros is a mid-range deck. I mean, if you look at all these multicolor decks, with the exception of Boggles, which operates along a very unique approach, you don't generally find multicolored aggro decks because it's so important to hit those early land drops, and you can't have the tapped lands. But then in Pauper, there's no untapped dual lands that you can operate on. So this is always going to have this weird effect on the macro level where, because being able to get access to multiple colors is very powerful, there's a sort of built-in biasing factor towards mid-range and control in that way. Now, don't get me wrong, aggro still has its moments because, um, you know, being able to get access to other colors and do other things is great. But even when you look at standard and modern, you'll still occasionally see some singular focused aggressive strategies. I mean, yes, in modern there is more of a Boros burn, but it's largely monocolored. And there's the 8 whack aggro deck in modern, which is basically red. So even in formats where you have potential access to untapped dual lands, there's still a lot to be said for the consistency of a monocolored aggressive deck. And throughout Pauper's history, there have been a lot of good aggressive monocolor lists. You go back about, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that, and mono green Stompy was at the top of the format, and there haven't been a lot of new cards that have come out since that time. I mean, nothing major to really shake things up. There's just been a lot of shifts and evolutions in the metagame, not based necessarily on new cards, but just people reacting to things. I will say this: I think that the Is It Delver deck in particular is, and the mono blue deck to some lesser extent, are a lot like the there was this point, I don't know, 5 months ago back in modern, where Grixis Death Shadow was just at the top of the format, and people were starting to wonder if this was something that needed a ban, if some component of the Death Shadow deck, or maybe even Death Shadow, needed to be banned. And now I think anybody who even talks about those discussions would get a little bit laughed at, because everybody's like, "What? This is not a deck that needs to be banned." What this deck is doing is it has absurdly hyper efficient mana. You have a ton of things that you can drop for 1 mana. Death Shadow, 1 mana. Street Wraith is free. Tasigir is effectively 1 mana. Gurmag Angler, 1 mana. You just go down the list, is all 1 mana. Even Dismember can be for 1 mana. And then the stuff that you have that costs more than 1 mana, you've got 4 Snapcaster Mages, and then you've got 2 Teamer Battle Rage, which is not necessarily stock. I mean, it's kind of sort of stock, but there's some variability in how these lists are put together. And then a couple of Kolaghan's commands, which are more stock. So I mean, you're talking about a 60 card deck with 8 cards that cost more than 1 mana, and at that, only 2 cards in the entire list that cost 3. Again, I'm discounting the Delve cards and the Dismember. So you just have super hyper efficient mana. You're operating on a very low land count, plus you've got additional deck thinning for the mana, and you even have some little built-in card advantage-y things going on with 2-for-1s on Kolaghan's command, along with having Snapcaster Mage shenanigans available. You could even, it very rarely is it needed or happen, but theoretically Tasigir could even get you some card advantage. So, and then you've got the counter spelling. You basically drop a powerful Death Shadow, back it up with counter magic, and you've just got a strong combination of efficient card play, some card advantage things going on, and the ability to have a powerful threat backed up by a counter spell is just backbreaking in a lot of matchups. And this is basically pretty similar to what Is It Delver does, where getting a ninja on board on turn 4 with a counter spell to back it up, or sneaking a ninja in earlier where your opponent can't respond, or a delver, either one, with counterspell backup, tends to lead to situations where your opponent just can't win. And when that game plan fails, the deck's backup plan is not bad, where it just keeps grinding value by getting little 2-for-1s here and there, and getting a little bit of card advantage here and there. A lot like how Snapcaster Mage and Kolaghan's command are able to grind out value. So I think that these are pretty similar in that when they're at their best in a metagame situation where people haven't made adjustments and there's been nothing to shake it up, it can feel like an oppressive deck, but it's really a fair deck, and it's really not something that should require a ban. You just need some time. So I don't think we should be banning anything right now in Pauper. I don't think that's a good idea for the format. I don't think it's necessary. And I don't think it would actually accomplish what the people who would promote it would want the ban to accomplish. So I do think it's healthy to have the discussion, and for that reason I wanted to talk about it. Yeah, I don't think anything's necessary right now. In my next video, I want to get back to talking about probably doing a few more deck reviews. I do want to take just a minute now here at the end for those who actually listen to this entire video to drop you with a few little nuggets of inspiration in case you're in a situation where you're struggling against these decks that take advantage of some of these blue cards that can be really frustrating, particularly the fairy based Izzet Delver and mono blue Delver strategies. I think right now one of the reasons blue black control has risen to where it's at is because it's really just one of those rare situations when you can play a control deck that gets free wins. That's very unusual. So you get basically free wins against, I shouldn't say free because you have to, make sure you sequence things correctly and whatnot. But I mean, when Mono White Heroic and Bogles go all in, stacking everything up on a singular creature, and you play an Edict effect, you're gonna blow them out, and that's kind of cool to actually. Normally it's aggro decks that get the free wins, but there's a couple of decks. Also, if you've got sweeping effects like Pestilence or Crypt Rats, or there's a few other things you could do. You can blow up some elves as well. Blue Black Control has problems with Tron, where Tron can just get into the big mana situation where it just can play more spells, do more things. And then burn is usually a problem for blue black control as well. But one of the interesting things, burn's been sliding down right now. Lately I've played a fair amount of blue black control in the queues, and I'm definitely solidly net positive. I'd say over the last several months, that's the deck whenever I've had time to play, that's basically what I've gone to. I think I've done 3 weekend challenges and haven't had any grade 6s. I think I went like 4-3, 4-3, 3-3 and drop. I just basically just doing kind of even, but in the queues I think I've been, or in the leagues I've been 3-2, 3-2, 4-1, 4-1, 5-0, 3-2. I mean, I think I've played like 5 or 6, and it's just gone reasonably well pretty much all the time. And you've got so many options you can run. One of the things I wanted to point out is Snuff Out against, again, particularly against these ninja decks where basically resolving a threat and backing it up with a counterspell is really important to their game plan. So basically, Snuff Out is definitely all-in kind of a thing, but it's pretty good. If you combine this with Edict effects, and then you've got other card draw options and maybe some threats of your own, you can definitely blow out some Delver players, because they're expecting if you're tapped out and then they tap out to slam a ninja, or they figure if they've got a ninja and they've got counterspell backup and you've got enough mana to play a removal card, they might think, okay, either way I'm going to be able to slam this ninja in, and just having the ability to play a free spell to kill their ninja or their Delver is usually going to be enough to blow them out. So not always, I mean there's a lot of variability in. So yeah, and then another card I kind of wanted to give a shout out to is Deep Analysis. Having the ability to get a 4-for-1 is kind of a good thing. So you pay 4, it's a lot of mana, so I mean this is kind of where you use your cheap removal early on to get into the middle and late game, and then once you get into the middle and late game, Muldrifter is always a great option. But I like a few of these somewhere. Just because you pay 4, you draw 2 cards, and you can flash it back to draw 2 more cards. You are going to spend life. I mean, Snuff Out costs life, this costs life, so you have to keep that in mind about how far you're willing to go to sacrifice your life total, and whether or not you. I'm not necessarily saying you should run both of these in the same deck list, but maybe at some point I'll do a little deck tech on my little pet blue black deck. Although I don't think it's necessarily the greatest thing, but it's just fine right now. I guess I'm not as concerned about the Delver matchup because I'm about 50-50 in the matchup basically, and I could actually set up my sideboard to be even better against those decks. It's just that right now, when I'm playing blue black, when I run up against Tron lists and I run up against burn lists, I have to allocate a lot of sideboard slots to make sure I've got at least some chance to stay in those matches as well. So it just kind of ends up being this sort of 50-50 matchup thing where I am not the best player, so I'm not killing it, but I can play well enough to basically win more than I lose, and that's my eternal grind. Other than that, if you can't beat them, join them. It's not a bad way to go. Playing Izzet Delver and Koldatha Boros are both reasonable options right now. Inside Out combo, it looks very nice right now as well. And one of the last things I do want to mention, I said this before in a recent video, I do think having a deck like Izzet Delver at the top of the format is actually kind of nice. I would much rather have something like this at the top of the format than have Tron at the top of the format. And if you ban Preordain and Ponder, you might just send Tron to the top because it doesn't give a crap about that kind of fixing. It's not operating on that level. The standard list doesn't run any Ponders or Preordains. It's just going big with Mnemonic Wall, Muldrifters, doing all this big mana crazy stuff with Ghostly Flickers. And the thing that's really funny is the most popular default MTG Goldfish Tron list isn't even running Ancient Stirrings, which is kind of, I mean, I would argue even better than Ponder or Preordain in a deck like Tron, but or at least can be depending on how it's tuned. I mean, now in this kind of a list, you don't have a lot of colorless things that you can go for, but you could tweak it a little bit where a reasonable amount of the time you'd make sure you weren't just firing off a blank and then making your Tron drops even more consistent. I think that Serrated Arrows is really good right now, so you could probably find a way to jam a few extra colorless value things in there. And of course, there's Mono Green Tron, which I've covered before, which definitely goes that route. Anyway, the point is that I think having Izzet Delver at the top is just fine. I do not want to see Blue Black Control or Tron at the top of things. That would definitely just be an ugly thing. You don't want something like Boggles to be the best deck in the format either. So I mean, you have to ask yourself, what do you actually want to be in that top slot? I think a lot of people would like to see aggro there, and it's been there a lot from time to time. Not as much in recent history. Stompy was there, like I said, about 6 months or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but within the last year. And yeah, mid-rangey tempo, that's fine. I think it's acceptable. And the fact that Inside Out Combo and Izzet Delver are both taking advantage of cantrips, yes, it's true, but they're also doing two very different things, and it's just basically fine. We'll see where things go. I mean, if things get a lot worse, if things just keep stagnating, and you see that Inside Out Combo and these Delver decks just keep soaking up more and more percentage of the meta, then maybe at some point we do have to seriously look at doing something. I actually think if you absolutely had to target something, I would say either Ninja or Gush would be the way to go. Probably Gush if both decks were a problem, because it sort of knocks both of them down a notch without really impacting much else. That's where I would actually start first. But I don't think that's necessary right now. I think that these decks may also be even more popular than they should be. Not so much Inside Out Combo, but recently it really popped when LSV was streaming with it. Not that that's impacted the people who have been really performing very well with it. I think Green Priney, one of the original innovators, has been doing his own thing for quite some time. But as far as the unwashed masses out there running these options, the rest of us schlubs, uh, there's getting to be an influx of new people that are trying to figure out this format and what they should play. And I think a lot of people just look to the top deck in the format, and that's where they're hopping in on the bus at, figuring, well, if it appears to be the best deck in the format, in quotes, I mean, I might as well start there. Probably can't go too wrong. So Is Delver's good, but it's probably getting an extra bump from new people just kind of grabbing it and going with it when they are not entirely sure what else to do. So we'll see. We'll see where things go, but I don't think we should panic at this point. I think everything's actually just fine. That's all for today. Thanks, guys.